Team USA Hockey on Saturday Night Live, comedy or crisis PR? If you watched Saturday Night Live on the 28th of February 2026, you probably saw a moment that looked very simple. But if you thought about it more deeply, there was probably a lot swirling beneath the surface and behind the scenes than was actually seen on stage. The star of the incredibly popular show Heated Rivalry, Connor Storrie, walked out to deliver his monologue. Then Quinn and Jack Hughes appeared wearing their Olympic gold medals. At first, I was cringing to see Jack Hughes up there because that man should never have been given a microphone again for a variety of reasons. Then two members of the women's gold medal team, Hilary Knight and Keller, joined them, and they received a noticeably stronger audience reaction. Knight delivered the line that made the intent clear. It was initially going to just be the women, but they decided to invite the guys as well. On the surface, it was very charming, very funny, and quite sweet. All four hockey players were extremely wooden and awkward in the way elite athletes often are on live television. The audience laughed along, and the medals looked fantastic, and everyone looked a little bit relieved. Beneath the humour, it played like an attempt to calm a very public dispute. So I want to look at the question I've been asking myself. Was this always the plan, or did someone have to move mountains to turn Studio 8H into a highly strategic reset button? I should add that all of this is only speculation on my part based on what I've seen, as I have no idea what goes on behind the scenes and can only guess. The men came off exactly as you would expect NHL players to come off in a live comedy environment. Stiff, unsure. Quinn Hughes in particular looked like someone who would rather be anywhere else but under studio lights, trying to land a joke in front of a live audience. The awkwardness probably worked in his favour. In a week where the accusation was entitlement or insensitivity, being awkward and harmless was probably an improvement. Then, when the women entered, the vibe in the room shifted sharply. Knight and Keller were very much the stars of the moment, and the joke explicitly positioned the women as the primary invite and the men as the add-ons. It not only did not ignore the fact that the women have won gold more recently and more consistently, it acknowledged directly that the men's gold medal came after a 46-year gap. The framing was definitely not neutral. It was mirroring the exact criticism that has been circulating all week, that women's achievement is too often treated as secondary. The sketch was clearly designed to absorb that criticism and invert it. The Hughes brothers, representing Team US men presumably, stood there and accepted being the butt of the joke. They didn't push back or seek to reclaim the spotlight. They allowed themselves to be positioned as the late additions as they grinned rather foolishly at the camera. The skit will be interpreted differently depending on who you are. For some viewers, it will be sweet, funny, and redemption through humility. For others, it screams crisis management, crisis PR, and optics management. The context is significant. After Team USA's men won gold, a video circulated of a congratulatory call with US President Donald Trump in which a joke about inviting the women's team and impeachment became a flashpoint. The reaction of the men's hockey team, they laughed, resulted in significant backlash in some circles. Other circles claimed that the critics were just being precious and woke. At the same time, reporting highlighted travel optics. The men returned by military chartered flights, while the women travelled commercially. Coverage noted that the women's travel schedule was specifically cited when they declined an invitation tied to the political calendar. Hilary Knight publicly called the joke distasteful and emphasised that it overshadowed women's accomplishments. The men's responses was very mixed. Some players owned it and acknowledged that the incident and their reaction were both unfortunate and said that they would have handled it differently with hindsight. Others continued to lean into the fact that it was a joke and that some of their best friends were women and that they had every respect for the women. Their line of defense was to frame the backlash as overreaction. So when we see Knight appearing on SNL days later and delivering a line that effectively closes the loop, it's very hard to hand-wave it away as just being random, and it feels like a lot must have been going on behind the scenes. Clearly, Connor Storrie hosting SNL was not something that could have been arranged within 48 hours. In fact, the public host announcement for the 28th of February episode was already out in the world weeks earlier. It was reported on 1st of February in some places and late January in others, depending on time zones. Whatever happened after the gold medal fallout, the base booking clearly predates it. The part that clearly appears to have changed after the controversy is the monologue from Storrie itself. SNL rewrites constantly, including late in the week, because responding to the week's news is the whole point of the show. The line about the women being invited first was obviously not random. It was directly addressing what people have been arguing about all week. In other words, Storrie was booked before the controversy, but the monologue was almost certainly rewritten after it took place. We don't have proof of who suggested what, but the timing means that the monologue would have been rewritten to address the backlash that the men's hockey team was receiving. So one question is, why Quinn Hughes? Jack Hughes is super awkward in front of the camera, but because he scored the golden goal, that would explain his presence. But in terms of why Quinn Hughes was there, that was quite puzzling. Because if you're casting for charisma, he's definitely not the obvious first choice for pretty much anybody. He is an elite defenseman, a leader, a Norris caliber player, and arguably the first or second defenseman in the NHL. He is, however, not known for interviews or high voltage personality. In fact, he's often described as understated, awkward, and downright weird with his staring at ghosts thing, which could have been one of the reasons he was picked. Because if you're trying to calm things down after a controversy, you don't put your most polarizing player on live television. You pick someone who is unlikely to say anything inflammatory and who does not already divide opinion. There are players on the roster who attract strong reactions. Brady and Matthew Tkachuk are two pretty obvious examples. There's also Tage Thompson, who's attracting some pretty negative vibes lately. Putting one of those guys on SNL would have risked making things worse. Quinn Hughes is seen as quiet, awkward, and generally pretty uncontroversial. That works in this situation, as he does not trigger strong emotions in the audience, and that would lower the risk. Whether this was carefully planned or just common sense, it makes practical sense as another damage control decision. In terms of Hilary Knight, this is the part that I have found the most intriguing and perplexing. A few days earlier, Knight criticised the joke as distasteful. She also made it clear that she felt that fixing men's behaviour, or the behaviour of someone else, was not her responsibility. So it's very interesting to see that she has gone on to SNL and has delivered the line that effectively eased the tension and has bailed the men out of the hole that they have dug themselves into after she's gone and said that it's not a woman's job to explain the actions of someone else, i.e., a man. The facts are pretty simple. She criticised the joke. She then appeared in a sketch that helped to reset the tone and redeem the men. I have no idea why she decided to do it. If I had to guess, there are a few possibilities. She may have decided that appearing on SNL was a way to put the focus back on the women's achievement, instead of letting the entire week revolve around the men's mistake. She might have concluded that keeping USA Hockey publicly united was better for the women's game in the long run, even if it was not technically her job to repair the situation. Or she may simply have seen an opportunity to take control of the moment. The joke does not beg the men for forgiveness, it makes them the add-ons. And it does make the women look as if they are taking the higher moral ground. There's also the Ellen Hughes bridge theory. And this was another thought that I had about why Hilary Knight may have chosen to do it and why someone like Quinn Hughes was on the stage with Jack Hughes. And that's Ellen Weinberg Hughes. She's the mother of Quinn and Jack Hughes. Reporting has noted her involvement in official capacities connected to women's hockey. When asked about this clusterpluck, she naturally dodged and evaded the topic like a seasoned politician, urging unity and perspective and basically pretending that the issue didn't exist. But I can't help wondering if she was involved in brokering or influencing the SNL appearance. The reason her name surfaces in analysis is structural. She occupies a rare intersection between the men involved and the women affected. If there were conversations framed as, do this for the sport, but make sure it does not diminish the women, then she is logically someone who could have facilitated this. like I've said, I have no clue about this and I'm just speculating, given that it's a pretty big compromise and a walk back on the part of Hilary Knight in the space of a few days. The next intriguing issue for me was Connor Storrie. The obvious question for me was, why would the star of a hugely popular queer hockey romance help a hockey league that has repeatedly been criticised for its handling of LGBTQ plus issues? The NHL has made decisions in recent years that have angered LGBTQ plus fans, including banning pride-themed warm-up jerseys and briefly restricting pride tape before reversing that position. To this day, there are no openly gay NHL players. There would be gay players, of course, but clearly the league is not a place where a gay player would feel comfortable coming out. So the league's record on inclusiveness, in particular in relation to gay issues, has not been fantastic. There seems to be an uncomfortable irony in the NHL benefiting from the visibility and goodwill of the most openly queer, friendly hockey brand in mainstream entertainment right now. I'm not thinking conspiracy theory, you just have to look at the incentives. So, from Connor Storrie's perspective, there were at least three practical pressures at play for why he would participate in something like this. The first, he was about to host a nationally televised episode centered on hockey at the exact moment that men's hockey was in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Ignoring the controversy would have looked evasive. Addressing it directly was arguably the only viable option if the show was going to talk about hockey at all. And of course, it had to talk about hockey because Heated Rivalry is about gay hockey players. Secondly, he had to protect his own product. Heated Rivalry sells a version of hockey that is emotionally open and inclusive. If the real NHL was dominating headlines for looking sexist or aggressive, that would damage the atmosphere around the sport, and his show depends on positive vibes. Helping cool things down protected the broader hockey brand, which in turn protected his show, which is slated to have a second season. Third, professional advancement. Hosting SNL is a major career moment. Being at the center of a nationally discussed segment makes him look composed and influential, not just popular. So this would have helped his career immeasurably, regardless of the politics involved. On the stage, the balance of power was pretty clear. The NHL players were guests in his monologue. The too busy to watch joke or dig allowed the male players to avoid openly endorsing a queer romance while still standing next to him and benefiting from his audience. So, to put it bluntly, the NHL got reputational cover, and Storrie strengthened his own position, and both sides gained something from the arrangement. In terms of the line that is more than it seems, when the male players said they were too busy to watch the show, that's an interesting line that was in the monologue. At face value, it is a typical athlete answer. The NHL season or the professional hockey season is incredibly busy, so it allowed the male players to say that they haven't seen the show without sounding hostile. Most importantly, it means that they don't have to openly say that they watched a gay romance series, which could challenge the macho masculine image that they're used to projecting in the NHL. If you take a look at all of the interviews that have been conducted with male players to date, all of them say things like, I've heard about it, I support it, I've heard good things, my wife has watched it. But no one in the NHL has admitted that they have watched Heated Rivalry, although they probably have. But at the same time, the professional female hockey players said that they had watched it. So this makes them look more open and less defensive, even though they are probably just as busy as the men. So the joke gave everybody cover. The NHL players avoided taking a clear public position on the show's queer themes, while they still benefited from standing next to its very popular star. And the women were able to look morally superior yet again. This is just my interpretation, but it follows directly from how the joke was written and delivered. As I've mentioned, I do not think that the appearance of the hockey players on the show was by accident. Quinn and Jack Hughes were in the middle of an NHL season, and getting them to New York for rehearsals and a live broadcast would have required approval from their teams and coordination around flights, security, and scheduling. That only happens if the league and the teams decide it is worth doing. When a controversy threatens the reputation of high-profile players, the people who manage those reputations get involved. That means league communications staff, USA hockey officials, broadcasters, agents, and anyone else with something to lose if the story keeps spiraling. So again, this isn't a conspiracy, it's just extrapolating from how professional sport works. If the appearance on the show helped to calm the backlash, then the people in charge had every reason to make it happen. So in terms of whether this was planned or a pivot, let's line everything up so that we can make sure that we're not being conspiracy theory and that we're drawing defensible inferences. Connor Storrie was booked weeks before the controversy. The controversy exploded days before the show. The monologue directly addressed that controversy. Quinn and Jack Hughes were in the middle of an NHL season, and moving them to New York for rehearsals and a live broadcast required approval from their teams and travel clearance. It required cooperation from league operations. That doesn't happen unless people in authority decide it should happen. Bill Guerin was the Team USA GM, connected to the original locker room access by Kash Patel that led to the backlash and the phone call, and the further backlash. He had both motive and proximity to want the situation stabilized, so it is reasonable to assume he was involved in conversations about how to repair the damage. The NBC had just broadcast the Olympics. The NHL's image was under pressure. Connor Storrie and the Hughes brothers also share major agency representation. When reputations, broadcast partners, and agency clients are all exposed at the same time, senior people talk. The too busy to watch line also reads like something that may have been negotiated. It protected the male players from having to publicly endorse a queer romance while still getting the benefit of standing next to its popular star. This sort of tonal middle ground usually reflects a negotiation and wouldn't have been an accident. So in my mind, there's no doubt that this was a very well orchestrated and clever crisis PR or damage control. So in the end, even if people don't agree with me, these are my questions. What was it? Was this a genuine show of unity? Was it a coordinated effort to repair the men's image before the backlash hardened? Did Hilary Knight decide to take control of the moment, or was she asked or heavily encouraged to help steady the ship? And if the NHL is willing to lean on the popularity of a queer hockey series when it needs help, what does it actually owe that audience when the cameras are off?